first I thought, I'm going to say what's happened in the past 5 years, and then I thought I'm going to offer the sort of broader perspective. For most of us in this room, if you think about it, the changes that have happened in our lifetime, and for many of us our adult lifetime, have gone from pre-digital to digital being ubiquitous. And people forget that because it is ubiquitous. But just to give you a couple, I was sitting downstairs jotting down a couple things that come to mind. In our lifetime, there was the introduction of credit cards, probably around the 1970s. People think that that's been forever. It is not. Movies have come to our homes, or TV to some of our homes, color TV, personal computers, laptops, cell phones, tablets, and readers. Those are all not only in our lifetime, but in the last handful of years. Online shopping, which in 2000 people thought would never ever happen because nobody would ever trust their credit card number in a computer. And now sort of the big thing I think right now is the whole idea of the cloud, storage in the cloud. And I'm not sure where it goes beyond that, but I'll get to that in a second. When I was at the White House in, I think it was 1994, we were rolling out the WWW, and we were having a hard time remembering what all 3 W's stood for. It's absolutely true, all of us. In the skip room, like in the secured room, going, what's the other W?
And was Al Gore involved?
He was.
Okay, that's what I said.
He was very involved. I'm not sure I would say he invented it. Nor the people in the 1940s or 60s. Yes. In 2006, when I was hired away from UCLA to go to USC and start a program on, they weren't quite sure what, but something online communities, I held a salon to explain to business leaders, investors, and university scholars and administrators what MySpace was, 2006. Today we'd have to hold the same salon to explain what MySpace is. So since 2006, we have basically introduced MySpace to the world, and it has now become completely not worthy of discussion, except for my joke. By the way, you didn't mention that I'm a psychologist.
She's a psychologist.
And 5 years ago, and I just was off the top of my head, Five years ago was about the time that Facebook caught up with MySpace and was passing it. MySpace was hot, Ning was hot, Orkut, how many of you are on Orkut? The big thing was the birthday reminder, any of you on that site? Friendster, Flickster, Black Planet, GeoCities, and they were just introducing things like Skype and the Kindle. Okay, so that's 5 years ago. So that's the blink of an eye. I mean, truly the blink of an eye, that those things can come and go. So where are we 5 years from now? Who knows, right? Because we wouldn't have predicted any of that then. But there are always trends, and I always think it's worth thinking about the trends probably more for the immediate than for the broad future. Trends right now, I'm just going to toss them out. It'll get you thinking so that we can all have a discussion in a few minutes. Trends right now, I think the hottest trends and the most stable trends are integration. Everything has to be integrated, and transmedia, not only in entertainment, but in all business and in politics and economics and everything. Visual, it's all about visual, it's all about personal, it's all about private, it's all about temporary. Because remember, it was all about sharing and public and permanent. So now we've flip-flopped the other way. It's mobile, it's real time, it's bartering. How interesting is that? It's niche instead of broad. It's Amazon ruling the world, and I could go on and on about that, but I will not. Including movies, books, services, cars, mink stoles, if anybody's willing to wear fur anymore, I will not. But the reality is that in addition to integration, it's all about content. It will always be all about content and quality, always. It will always now be about influencers instead of just pushing the message out to individuals, and it's all visual. The only other thing I want to say before handing it off to my superior intellect over here is that, I'm not kidding, is we jump from trend to trend, but if you think back in history to the beginning of any technology, we always jump from trend to trend. When TV started, people would watch test patterns, right? When TV started, everybody thought that's the end of radio because TV is radio with pictures, so why bother? But what do media do? Media will always adapt. There's virtually, I can't think of a medium that has disappeared when a new one has come to replace it. Instead, they adapt. So radio, this is a digression, but radio, which was all about entertainment programming, turned to music and news, really, and then really segmented niche areas. The country western station, which I don't listen to. Now with Sirius Radio, you can find any era, any genre. So things adapt, they specialize, they shrink, but they don't necessarily disappear. So the question is, are we still going to jump from trend to trend like we have in this very beginning stages of digital media, like we did in the beginning stages of other media? Or are we going to jump from trend to trend, from platform to platform, from app to app? Or are we actually now possibly at the beginning of the maturity of this? Have we now settled into things? Have we found the utilities? I absolutely, honestly, I think it was 2008, I started saying that instead of, like MySpace and Friendster were sort of like nightclubs that then became uncool and then people disappeared from them. I think that, I've always thought that Facebook accidentally, and this is I won't tell you this, but by accident, by luck, became a utility rather than a nightclub. It's our address book and our photo gallery. So will it disappear? I have to tell you, like pretty much nobody's really on it anymore in the entertainment surfing way that they used to be. In fact, the people who are the older and older people, because it's a way to keep in touch. It's an actual communication channel now. But is it a nightclub? Is it a social area? Not really. But is it there as a utility? Yeah. Is Amazon there as a utility? Yes. Are those going away anytime soon? Probably not. So are we now finally hitting the moment of sort of maturity where we can predict that some of these utilities are here, and now the question is, how do we provide the right content or curate or create the right conversations to have in these on these platforms and apps and sites?
Right, very helpful. Okay, I'm going to introduce Joe. I just want to say I still go to Facebook every 4 months, like clockwork, to find people I went to high school with, and then I find them and I get depressed, because they all look so old. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Joe Medved, and when I tell you his credits, you'll all be duly impressed. But before that, just to tell you, he received his BA from McGill University and his master's and PhD from the University of Toronto, where he taught for 2 years and founded the Cinema Studies program. What? Did I say what I said? I read 12 years. Before moving to Los Angeles to work as a producer. He told me he did not get a manicure after he got his PhD, so that tells us something about Joe. And he also worked as a journalist and editor for Take One magazine in Canada, Canadian Forum, the London Times Literary Supplement, and the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. But since coming to Hollywood, his credits include, and there are probably 30 or 40 of them, but just a few that you might know: Ghostbusters, Ghostbusters 2, Twins, Dave, Space Jam, Old School, Draft Days, which is your latest, and on and on. All movies that you've probably seen and enjoyed. So he was also the founder of something called the Criterion Collection, and I went to the website to see what that was all about, and it's a fantastic website with sort of a curated inventory of DVDs and movies that are sort of the creme de la creme in the history of filmmaking, and many other tidbits, and it's a wonderful website. So Joe, where are we now in the movie industry, and where do you think we might be going?
I definitely don't know where we're going. I will make some guesses. I mean, I can barely predict the present.
Much less the past.
Yeah, well, the past a little bit, but when I was a graduate student, one of my professors was Marshall McLuhan, who some of you probably have never heard of nowadays, but in the late 60s, around the time I was studying with him, he became very famous, so much so he has a scene in a Woody Allen movie. And I was, for a while, very influenced by him, and then I rejected him, thinking, none of this has happened. And then, of course, discovered that I was wrong and he was right. And he was prescient to the point of being, I would say, was a prophet, he was very right about what was going to happen in many ways. The problem was he said it as if it were happening now. But he liked using aphorisms. And one of his favorite aphorisms was, we don't know who discovered water, but we know it wasn't a fish. and what he meant was, what I'm saying, it's hard to predict the present. It's hard to see what's going on around us all the time, because we tend to take things for granted. And if you use sort of semiological terminology, or think about someone like Roland Barthes, who talks about things being naturalized, what we mean by that is we think things are just the way they're supposed to be, because they are that way. I mean, the example I always like to give is, which people would say it's a natural thing, is in the United States and 2 other countries in the world, we still use a measurement system called the imperial, I think it's called the imperial system. The only other countries in the world that do are Liberia and Burma. And it's an insane system. I mean, if you cook, trying to figure out how many ounces there are in a cup and a quart, as compared to multiplying by 10. But if you ask any Americans, they don't want to change, because this is somehow the unnatural way things are. I think it's actually something that came from Britain, which I think you had a revolution. And they don't use the system anymore. But we're still using this British imperial system, which is a horrible system of measurements. It's very difficult to use, but it's somehow natural. It's easier for us, we think it's easier to understand because we do understand it. And so people will say it's human nature to think this way. Watch out for anyone who says talks about human nature or common sense. Whenever anyone tells you something's common sense, especially a politician, run for the hills. Or human nature. I had a friend who was a very good screenwriter and filmmaker named Peter Wallen. And I once heard Peter say he'd spend his lifetime trying to differentiate between nature and history. What we really are hardwired for, and we are discovering we are hardwired for some interesting things. Doesn't matter who you are or what society you're from. But a lot of what we think is natural is a cultural construct, probably. So it's very hard to even see what's going around us. I can go much further in the past than this lady can. To me, anything's recent since Elvis died. And around the time Elvis died, there was a computer called the Cray computer, which was the fastest computer in the world. It cost $5 million and weighed many tons. It had the computing power of this.
Wow.
But if you owned a Cray computer in 1977, actually, is when it was invented, you could rule the world. There were very few of them in the world at the time. So we're all now carrying around the equivalent of a Cray computer, which obviously changes the way we see things. Nick Negroponte, who used to run the Media Lab at MIT, about 10 years, or probably 15 years ago now, used to write about how we were transitioning from an era of atoms to an era of bytes.
Right.
In other words, bytes as in, a byte as in a byte in a computer. So that when, I've got as many books on this now as I had in the library in some of my apartments, and they're in bytes. I mean, it gets really interesting as to who actually even owns them. And what happens when we transition from one medium to another medium is we tend to use the language and iconography of the old medium. So if you've got email, you probably have little images that look like envelopes. And when you read a book on this or something like it, you talk about pages, which makes no sense whatsoever. Yeah, and you see people.
Carbon copy.
I didn't even know what it meant.
Yeah.
Carbon copy.
And blind carbon.
Yeah, blind carbon copy. So we tend to use we're so much stuck, it's so hard for us to move on. The hard thing about new technology or new ideas is not learning new things. Young people can do it really easy. It's because they don't have old things. They don't have old things to unlearn. The hard part is unlearning the old things. And being frightened. Because what has happened has been very disturbing. It's disruptive. I mean, I would claim that the digital revolution, which we're still in, I think, is as disruptive as the Industrial Revolution was in the late 19th century. And we reacted in much the same way, which is we fight against it. You know, we have Luddites not reading. But, you know, you can read any number of books that will tell you why Facebook is bad for you. And I think in order to, one of the other things McLuhan said, who was actually a very old-fashioned guy. People thought of him as being some hippy-dippy, whatever. He was a stern Catholic, dressed very, you know, like a university professor, was shocked to discover that his friend Timothy Leary actually took drugs. I remember coming to class one day and saying, no, he actually does drugs, he doesn't just talk about them. But he said he could see what he could see because he didn't make value judgments. He didn't say it was good or bad. He just tried to look at what was going on. In fact, he probably disapproved of much of what was going on in the 60s. But if you spend your time disapproving of it, it's very hard to look at and see what it is. So when I say it's disruptive, I mean, I read a really scary example the other day, which is Kodak, which has basically disappeared. At its height, employed 62,000 people. Instagram, which you might claim, if you exaggerated it, replaced Kodak, employs 14 people. And one of the things that's going on in the economy, as we all worry about the disappearance of the middle class and all these things, is it's like the Industrial Revolution coming along. There is a whole new economy out there, and we don't know what it's going to do, and it is disruptive.
So, can I pick up on that a little bit?
Sure.
And I'll come back because the movie industry, but I want to talk, you said, we don't know if this is good or bad, and that Marshall McLuhan was sort of atheistic about good or bad.
Agnostic about it.
Agnostic, forgive me, you get a really smart guy. But with the ubiquitous nature of the internet and social media, Karen, what about our sense of intimacy with each other? What about that sense of privacy? What about relationships? And how is that all being impacted? I just read this piece yesterday by David Brooks in the New York Times. I don't know if anyone saw it, but he was talking about, almost wistfully, about the relationship between Isaiah Berlin and a poet, a Russian poet, and the time they took to talk deeply and get to know one another and feel comfortable and explore their deeper feelings. Where are we with that? Is this in any way in jeopardy?
Well, two things. One is that they were different than most people of their time. So that's just
Not like
little-
my Aunt
I
Tizzy.
think like into perspective today. So most people are not as deep as the people that we think of as deep. So that they are symbolic of a time and a place, but they are not who most people were even then. So my bottom line as a psychologist is that human nature will never change.
Yeah.
Okay, let's just always remember that. Human nature will never change. People are who they are, they have the needs that they have, and they are influenced by the world around them. So that's the social I'm a clinical and social psychologist. So, so in addition to the internal self part of it, there's also the social influence part of it. None of that will ever change. And that's why the book, for example, there's a book called The Animal, and it's in something like its 35th edition. And the reason that people keep going back to that is that what was written then is written now. And I'll give you my better example, because my training is not Freudian, but I read Freud when I was in grad school, and I remember people criticizing Freud then and now and before me, you know, Freud, all this crazy sex stuff, pervert, blah, 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 blah. Freud did not make up any of those stories. Freud wrote about Oedipus. Oedipus is a story that was told by the Greeks. The Greeks did not make up the story of Oedipus, or the concept. They told a story. The stories that have resonated over the generations and the centuries are stories that have been true of human nature for all eternity. So my bottom line is that human nature will never change. So if you want to talk about the problem that we're facing now is maybe the opposite of then. There was a time when people would meet and they would feel a connection, and they would not be present with each other because of distance. And the distance might be the other side of town before television, so 2 doors away, Or it might be that they're on the other side of the world, and they would write letters, because that was the way that they had to communicate. And they would meet once in a while, or every afternoon. But it was not the kind of real time, I could contact you right now, wherever I am, wherever you are. So now we have, and so people would write, and they would put maybe a lot of thought into it, and they would have to develop that relationship for the people who wanted to in that way. The reality is that now we have the ability to contact each other in real time right now, without waiting, without thinking, and say whatever happens to be on our minds right now. So whereas maybe, but only maybe, those letters were deep and thoughtful, and the relationship built slowly and through thoughtful interchange, now it's through quick, superficial thoughts, or maybe quick, deep thoughts, I don't know. But it depends on the people. But while those people, the divorce rate hasn't changed much in generations. So people meet and they find each other, and they get close, and they develop an idea of who that other person is through whatever their communication is. Then it was slower, now it's faster. I don't know which is better. Slower might be better. But what we do have now that is a problem is that we are developing an entire generation or multiple generations of people who think that A, their every thought should be expressed, B, their every thought should be expressed publicly and is worthy of an audience, C, the content that they create is just as good as the professional content creators, which is not true. And these things, all these little devices help people, and the fact that you can now publish things to the world, on whether it's on Facebook or on a blogging platform or on YouTube, you feel like you're important. By the way, I have one just thing, because I'm all about content, that good content is all that really matters. I heard something that has never been verified to me, but I just want to share it to you in the world of what is good content. So, and I became interested because MTV a few years ago had ran a competition, kind of like the Doritos Super Bowl competition, please send us your content. And worldwide, they got something like 10 entries. It's like, how could MTV get nothing? This was a few years ago. They got nothing, but it still happens. So I was talking to somebody who should know the answer to this, and who said something to me that I then connected the dots and thought, oh, this is fascinating. Have you ever watched, I know this is like a Harvard group, so you don't want to admit to this, but I know that you have. Have you ever watched America's Funniest Home Videos?
Yes.
All of you, every one of you. Have you laughed because it is so funny, you cannot believe how funny it is, because it is always hilarious, right? And then at the end of the hour, after an hour of hilarious videos, they say, and now the nominees for the $10,000 or $20,000 prize are these three, and they are the three least funniest every time. So why is that? Anybody know why that is? Because America's Funniest Home Videos does not get enough submissions of user-generated content to fill an hour. So they pay professional content creators to create really funny videos, which are not eligible for the prize.
I have to just tell you, Karen, my whole world has been crushed here.
And I think it feels fantastic. Professional content creators create better content than the average person.
So when I was president of the Writers Guild, I pronounced, because this is when we were going first into reality TV, and I pronounced loudly, it was carried in several newspapers, reality TV will not last. And it just shows you how smart you can be.
Reality TV follows, whenever I've seen anything in reality TV, it's always followed pretty well the structures and the conventions of cinema as we've grown up with it. It's got
Storytelling.
music, it's got reverse angles that you couldn't possibly do if you were really shooting something live. You know, you can't get those reverse angles. You can't go from one person and then, because you don't see the camera. So they're obviously using one or maybe two cameras and restaging things.
It's scripted. So, but I want to follow up with the storytelling, because for me, what is most important is that we move into the future strengthening the capacity to tell stories, to tell them if it's nonfiction journalistically with integrity, if it's fiction, that we tell them with the dramatic arc and richness that we would hope for. I'm just finishing reading The Goldfinch, it took her 8 years to tell the story, it's brilliantly crafted. So with all this urgency, anybody, gets out there with their content, but there's so much, it's junk that's out there. So I want to turn to Joe and just ask this question, because I'm very interested in seeing how we can train storytellers for the future to make movies, and you've had such a remarkable career in movie making. What are the opportunities and what do we need to do to enrich those opportunities for the next generation of filmmakers?
Well, sort of want to say a bunch of things. One is, I'm really shocked by the story about MTV, because the Sundance Institute gets 5,000 submissions every year of feature-length films, of which, I don't know how many, I'm making these numbers up, 100 or so, which means 4,900 and whatever, probably don't get shown anywhere. They don't get into Sundance, they may go to some other film festivals. So there are an extraordinary number of films being made, partly because the capital cost has gone down to really nothing. When people come to me and say, I have this wonderful story, I really have to tell it, will you guys produce it? I usually say, well, go tell it, what do you need me for? I'm waiting for and I'm surprised this happened yet, it hasn't happened yet, the first critically acclaimed film, maybe even commercial film, a successful film that is made on a cell phone. I mean, there's no reason you can't. You can, because the digital revolution, we call it film. Sorry, I'm getting out of tangent.
No, it makes sense.
Okay, we call it film, but there is no film involved anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
People think there is, but they're literally, a couple of years ago, I was screening a film in a class that Leonard Maltin teaches at USC. And I mentioned that the editors had been joking about, although we had shot that film on film, it was the last film we did shoot on film about 3 years ago, they hadn't seen it on film because everything immediately is digitized, goes to the editing room in digital form. And they hadn't seen it until they did a test screening where they had a film backup in case the hard disk, which the film was going to be screened on, broke down or something. And I was mentioning this to the audience, and Leonard Maltin came forward and said, well, we're purists here. We show everything on film. And after the conversation was over and the students had left, the projectionist came up and said, Leonard, we haven't shown anything. People don't know. I mean, Christopher Nolan, the Batman director, says, films look better when they're shot on film and projected on film. Well, he may be able to shoot them on film, but it's going to be very difficult. The labs are closing down as we speak today. I mean, there are no labs. How do you make film? You can't buy film anymore. And the number of theaters that will project on film is minuscule, and that's within your 5-year or even your long-term. 5 years ago, the majority of theaters showed it on film. By the way, and again, economics, that's a $2 billion saving to the film business. On the other hand, a lot more, well, I'm not sure more people worked in film labs than work in digital labs. I just don't know enough about it, to be honest. In terms of narrative, there's a really interesting book about music called This Is Your Brain on Music, which I recommend highly. And though it gets a little technical because this guy's a rock and roll producer who's now a neurosurgeon. And
Say that again?
he was a rock and roll producer and now he works in neurosurgery. He teaches at McGill University. And he mentions in passing in the book that anthropologists, which I presume is a good way to study human nature, people who are not influenced by others, they have never found a society that doesn't have music and dance. So far. Maybe someday we'll find a society that doesn't have music and dance, but so far, no. Now, I suspect the same is true of narrative.
Yeah.
I bet you there's no society in the world that doesn't tell stories. And particularly in Western societies, the stories have had the same form for the last 2,000 or 3,000 years. I mean, when people ask about, what's the best screenwriting book you can read, I usually say, well, William Goldman has a book called Adventures in the Screen Trade. And there was this guy called Aristotle, who has a book called The Poetics. And the Poetics describes drama, the way we still react to it most of the time, even its form, So it's I'm not sure how you, but I'm not sure you can even teach people, except sort of tricks in some ways, about telling stories. And making movies and everything else is, though there are other kinds of movies, is generally telling stories. And it's, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it cost millions of dollars, or at least hundreds of thousands. Now, you can tell a pretty good story for a couple of $1,000s. If you own your own camera, you can do it for nothing.
Let me jump in. That stuff is so interesting to me. So it is true. I love that we have the same beliefs about these things, but it is true that it's all about the storytelling. And the interesting thing about that is that it's not just telling the stories that's about storytelling. If you talk to people who are out of the entertainment industry, but who work in social media, the big phrase is always telling a story. So people who have content agencies where they create advertising or websites or whatever it is, if they're the content people, they talk about, the good ones, talk about how they're telling a story. And that's the whole idea of this sort of transmedia. I mean, when you get back to entertainment, if you talk about how you have a movie or a TV show and then you have a website and a game and this and that, and social media campaigns that's kind of obvious, but the reality is that nobody's just running a trailer anymore. People, what they're really doing is they're creating additional content that tells little side stories that interest people in what some people refer to as the mothership, which is the movie or the TV show, which should never be tampered with so the casual consumers will like it. So you have now these crazy jobs where people are storytellers using different platforms or different media that are separate from the storytellers who are telling the official stories, whether it's entertainment or not. And similarly, people talk about, I have kids. I started thinking, are there going to be any jobs at all for my kids unless they become phenomenally successful? Because it is true that every industry you look at is shrinking. I don't know where the jobs will be because that is going to be a problem. And if you look at the music industry as sort of the lead on all these things, it is tiny by comparison, and the budgets are tiny. And the whole game now, unless it's changed in the last several months since I've talked to head people in that industry, is that they cannot make any money selling 99-cent downloads. Despite, it's the kind of Kindle revolution is interesting to me because you spend almost as much money for a digital book as you do a paper book, and that is one master that's then just distributed. So, but luckily that pays writers and people like that. But if you look at the music industry, they create a master, they sell it for 99 cents instead of selling an album for $17.99, and then people just distribute it to their friends, just like movies through BitTorrents, which are sort of the most evil thing I've ever seen. Personal opinion, but I could defend it. But then how do you actually make money? And the music industry has fallen back on a couple things. One is that there's a surge in concerts again, which is kind of nice. But the other one is that t-shirts. Well, that's what they talk about, exactly. Tickets and t-shirts. But the other part of it is that they are now marketing almost exclusively to the fanatic fan. The casual consumer like me, they don't care about me. Maybe I'll download a song, maybe I won't, or an album, maybe I won't. But what they want to do is they don't want to sell me the 99-cent song. They want to sell Joe the $400 box that includes jewelry designed by the artist and backstage, whatever, all that stuff. It's the fanatic fans who are not only going to spend $400 instead of 99 cents, but who are influencers and who, by their enthusiasm and their personal followings, can spread the word to other people that this is the thing to come to.
Quick response from Joe, and then I want to open it up to the group.
It's not a response, it's actually just an added thing, which is interestingly enough, and this doesn't help the economy at all. There are nevertheless more musicians than there have ever been before. Whether you call them amateurs or not. My son had a band and he played in some club in Brooklyn and they got 3 free beers and $10. And I said, congratulations, you're a professional. You got paid for playing. But there are more, and someone was saying, when the Beatles and whomever in England started, you could get noticed just because you were in a band. There are hundreds of bands in Santa Barbara, and they're all pretty good. It's just very hard to make a living, and they also get paid less than they did 15 years ago.
All right, let's open it up to the group, the roundtables. and see what questions come up. Does anyone have any questions? Yes?
I would like to hear your thoughts on art.
Mike,
Alright.
this is being.
Since it's being recorded, I think if you
Anna,
get
where
a,
did you go?
Oh,
and Mike, speak into the mic.
I think, is it on?
Yes,
It's on.
yeah.
Okay, I would be interested in hearing your thoughts on art because, visual art, because that has really made a difference, what's happening with digital. It's changed, it's multiplied in certain ways. And has it cheapened it or has it, photography is totally different. A photographer was an artist, now pretty much anyone can take a good picture. It's just one opinion, but I would love to hear what you see happening and in the next 5 years with art and technology.
It's both the best and the worst
Yeah.
thing that's ever happened. So there are a couple things. One is that artists now, people talk about this in terms of also performance and, filmmakers and all that, but there is now a way for an unknown person to find an audience, kind of, right? So the question is, how do you find that audience? And that's sort of the unanswered question. So if you're a painter and for some reason Dean Valentine sees your stuff, then you're done, right? Because he can then make your life and then he can promote it using social media. But how do you get the right influencer to support you? And that's still the big trick. So it becomes, I think, really complicated because now you have basically a platform for your portfolio. You can share your stuff, but you still have to find the influencers who will make your career. And that is not easy. The other thing is that the sort of great equalizer of the internet means that you are now not only up against other people who can get local galleries to show your work, but everybody else who just put their stuff up on the internet. So there's a lot more noise in the system. So it's both good and bad. And once somebody who's an influencer likes you and says, wow, you've got to look at this, then there's now the channel to show everybody. So that's good. And there are all these micro transaction sites where you can help get funding for your art or your non-art, So there are great opportunities, but the problem is that because of the lack of a barrier of entry, everybody, including people without talent, can jump in, so
Right, yeah.
good and bad.
Does everybody know what Karen means by these sort of micro-funding? Oh, good.
Isn't
Okay.
the most well-known one Kickstarter?
It's like
Kickstarter is sort of there are a lot of them. Kickstarter is always the most interesting to watch because they were early and they are very robust.
Yeah.
And it's fun to watch it.
Let's get the.
Wait, I'm sorry, by the way, if you do, take a look also, if somebody goes on Kickstarter, the big thing now is that they have to tell their story through other channels to try to drive people to Kickstarter in order to fund their project. So they not only now have to go onto Kickstarter, but they need to somehow create their storytelling campaign elsewhere to try to get enough speed going on their campaign. It's like a crazy amount of work that goes into it.
It's a crazy amount of work, yeah.
Along those lines, with Kickstarter, and I know this has changed a little bit recently, but people are making payments or funding these efforts for a t-shirt, for the first light bulb, for for the ability to say that they did it. How sustainable is that as a business model? Not for Kickstarter.
For each business?
The people who are getting the money, it's fine, but the people who are giving the money obviously have to be getting their funding from somewhere. I just don't know how that continues.
The last part that you said is probably the most important. People like to believe that they're participating in innovation, and now regular people can. It used to be that you had to be, a qualified investor and you had to know people and all that. So now for $5, look at the Barack Obama, how did he fund his campaign? It was crazy. I'm a Democrat, I work in the Clinton White House, but the insanity to me of having the whole and it worked, the whole campaign run on, oh, just contribute $5, but then they come back and come back and come back. But my favorite part was it was always things like, we're gonna do a matching campaign. Do you guys know what a matching campaign is?
Yeah.
Okay, do you know how his matching campaign worked?
No.
If you, I'm gonna use you, because you have great eye contact. If you contribute $10 in the matching campaign, and if I contribute $10 in the matching campaign, they match us. That wasn't a matching campaign, that was, like, it was crazy. It was, but we felt good because we participated in a matching campaign that matched us. I don't even know how that, I don't know how they solved that.
But they did one thing that I just loved, they said everybody out there named Victoria, because they had my name and all the other Victorias, if you all chip in, we're matching Victorias to Victorias, and I thought, yeah, I can go for that. And I'm thinking, this is just a new,
She bought into that, it's
but I bought
beautiful.
into that.
So you know what, they made it personal, so now, you know, it's like, Vicky can go like, oh my God, there are other Vickies who are doing this and we're together in this. I feel like a Vicky participant in a wave of Vickyism.
But you know, it is a whole new, I mean, to me, it's great to the extent that 40 years ago, my roommate was a folk singer. And he did something no one at the time had done. I didn't know anyone else who had done this. He announced to all his fans and wrote to all his friends and said, I'm going to make a record, I want you to pay for it in advance. Buy it in advance. I mean, it was like Kickstarter when we still used snail mail, which in Canada was even harder because the mail service was really bad in Canada. And you know, people thought he was crazy, and now everybody does it. And I remember thinking, when I was a student, I loved Jean-Luc Godin movies, and they were made for what seemed to be no money. And there had to be 2 million fans around the world. Why couldn't he raise money for movies, you know? If we all just sent him $1. But the problem was, there were 2 things. One is we couldn't reach him, which of course the internet has solved completely. You know, I forget, there's a woman singer from Canada who just announced she was going to make a new record, do it herself, and took in $1 million immediately, you know, pre-selling it herself. Radiohead has done this also. But the other problem Godard would have had at the time was, how does he get his film to me? You know, he had to actually make a print, which cost $2,000, send it to a theater, and maybe there's only 5 other guys in town who want to see the movie. Now, of course, he just streams it directly to me. And that's a huge change in our ability to, I mean, one thing in terms of the future, which we're supposed to be talking about, both of them, we don't know what's going to happen, and tendency isn't destiny. Whatever is happening now may not continue. I'm not sure people would need to go to movie theaters. The tendency, actually, the long-term thing since 1946 is fewer people go to movie theaters every year. There were huge drops between 46 and about 52. But since then, it's just been a small drop. But it is a small drop every year. And do you need to go to a movie theater if you've got a giant TV screen at home? And one of the reasons people used to go, you know more about this than me, was the community. But now you can watch a movie and be twittering at the same time, as people do with TV shows apparently. I mean, I'll slap you in the back of the head if you're doing it in the movie theater, which people seem to do all the time. But you could stay home, have all your friends get on the same, I don't know, you know better than me what you'd use, and watch a movie and comment about it, maybe hopefully wait to the end, but maybe not. That's a huge change in the way we watch visual stories.
Yeah, and you can make your own popcorn, so it's
Yeah.
also.
So wait, hold on. So I don't think movie theaters are gonna, just like radio and television, I think it's shrinking, but the idea of going out to a movie, especially on a date, is not going away very soon. Because it's just a great experience, and I think that, you know, that while it shrinks, I think that there's that will always be there. I think on your sort of Kickstarter thing, in addition to the pride of ownership, they're very clever in that, first of all, you don't own a share of for SEC reasons, but you don't own a share of that business. You might someday, but it used to be that if we wanted to invest in a good art film, we would have to figure out a way to do that and to make sure that he was going to make that movie. And what Kickstarter does is that you can invest, and they don't take your money until it reaches the level that they need to make it happen. So you will get your advanced copy of that product, okay? So if it's the t-shirts, then you're gonna get that t-shirt because they just got enough money for the t-shirt. So beautifully, because this is all playing out in social media, this weekend, or no, maybe it was this week, a day or two ago, a Kickstarter campaign started, I think it's Kickstarter, to buy the LA Clippers. And the problem is that they need $600 or $800 million, but in 24 hours they've raised $40,000 or something like that. But no, but it's it's crazy, but it's no. So everybody, I thought I'm going to do this just to be able to say I did it, but there's no risk until we hit like $800 million that they're actually going to charge your credit card. Right?
Did we have a question in the back there? Yes.
Yes, thank you. You talked a little bit about television before, and growing up, we watched sitcoms. There were soap operas, melodramas, The Tonight Show, and now we have The Voice. We have reality TV, which, as you pointed out, is not reality TV. It is scripted and it has camera angles. What do you see happening next in television? Will it just be more reality television or more talent competition?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
Well, let me just.
I'm shocked that I'm not
I
here.
might-
I thought reality TV wouldn't last.
Yeah, I think I think it's here to stay, unfortunately, reality TV, because there's always gonna be a segment of the population that are gonna like that, but on the other side of it, you have this explosion of new opportunities for limited series on Netflix, through Amazon, and this is pretty high quality stuff. It's some of the best television I've seen probably in the history of television. What's gone by the wayside is sort of what I did, one-off movies, which is a small movie that you could put on television because the economics aren't there. And they were for me because I didn't have to make a huge living, but if I was a company, I would have to make a bigger living. But I think there's even a place for the kind of movie that I made that was maybe a $3.5 million movie. To find a home on Netflix, somebody might like it there. It's a question of funding it, and maybe there are new sources of funding. So it's all kind of in flux, but in many ways it's a much more robust marketplace, would be my answer. I don't know if you'd agree, Joe or Karen.
Somebody did do a movie on Kickstarter. Zach, what's his name? The guy who has the scrap. Zach Kraft. Thank you. Good. You win.
Yeah. So let me just say, by the way, because just to go back and do the perspective thing, so we all hate reality TV, but game shows have always been around, right? So frankly, all we're watching are game shows. Okay, they're all game shows. So call it what you want, and going back to the human nature will never change, people are exhibitionistic. I mean, I know somebody, who you probably know actually, who's considering being on a reality show, and I thought, of course that person is. And that person is seriously exhibitionistic and is high profile enough that could get on to a show. But we're also all voyeuristic, right? And this is why all of this works. People want to share and people want to peer into other people's lives. This is why there's a weird, what's called a boomerang effect in psychology, where things are have gone around the wrong way. People think that social media is helping us stay in touch with each other. So, so I, like Vicki, I like to find old friends on Facebook and friend them, and then I go look at their pictures or their wall or whatever, and then I know what's up with them. But do I ever actually contact them? No. So Danielle Chaikin lives in Santa Barbara. We went to elementary school together. She and I check each other out on Facebook all the time. But did I tell her I'm here for the weekend? No, I didn't.
I'm calling her as soon as we leave.
You know her. Then I will meet her at this house.
I want to argue with this. I want to say the opposite about, sort of the opposite, which is not meeting old friends, but meeting new ones. And this started with me even before, when there were still news groups, because I have some esoteric interests. I like jazz a lot, and I like things like historical movies and things. And I just, and there might be two other guys in the city here who are interested as I am, or wherever. But online, I belong to a community of people who, most of whom I've never met, but where we discuss these esoteric things, mainly men, by the way, interesting. That is not because they're online. Only men get obsessed. You should, as a psychologist.
That's actually.
By collections.
Yeah.
It's like a friend of mine who's a Freudian, I think actually, but writes about film and psychology and jazz, weirdly enough, wrote a thing about collecting and pointed out that men do it. Men collect records in a way women don't. You'll never see a man who has volume 1 and volume 3. They don't have any volume 2. I can't remember the term they use, it's fear of absence or something. But it's very
Fear of the
funny.
void.
But I think it's great that I have met these other weird people all over the world, and I actually don't know what country many of them are in.
Yeah. So the
we're
chance,
discuss this.
so the opportunity to arrange your interests somewhere on your computer and then follow and build and enrich and deepen actually is much more robust. I think you coined a new expression, it's called voidophobia, meant for men.
I'm quoting someone else's
Okay.
Israel.
We have a question back here. Yeah.
And actually, this is kind of a nice segue because mine is a little bit off topic, and I've been thinking about LinkedIn. And I'm sure most everybody is on it, pretty much, if you're in the business world and community. What impact has that had, I mean, in terms of, there are lots of influencers, wannabe influencers, you know, the type of content, how many of us belong to groups in there, you know, it is having an impact, I think, on all of us, but are you seeing it changing the way professionals interact with one another, or is it a way to be the exhibitionist, as you call it?
Well, LinkedIn is different, and I mean, again, you're talking about something that I think of as a utility and a really valuable one.
Okay.
So LinkedIn, I mean, it really is a way that you can brand yourself professionally and connect with people with similar interests. And by the way, what Joe was saying, one of the great things, truly great things about the internet, it is true that boys and men collect things from baseball cards to, you know, verticals of wine to, you know, whatever it is, volumes of books. But it's always been hard to find those people. And you can now find any group of people on any topic, no matter how popular or unpopular, politically correct or politically incorrect, you can find your people out there and you can have your conversation with them. The problem is that it is now transparent, permanent, and repeatable, right? So ask Anthony Weiner, who sent a text to one person and it had a worldwide audience, right? So, so LinkedIn, you know, it's a good question, and Vicki asked that question too, sort of how does this change everything? It's a new channel. That's a very robust channel, and it's a channel that has been very good at maintaining its focus on we are only for business communication. They've recently done a variety of things that sort of gamify it a little bit, and you know, even the groups turn it into a little bit more social, so now it's social for business people. And the whole thing of it used to be that to endorse somebody you had to write. You actually had to write something. Now it's like a game. It's gonna just keep popping up with people I know and what I want to endorse them for. So is it really an endorsement? So I don't know, it'll be interesting to see how it changes. Right now, I think that it has pretty much killed all the other sort of resume aggregators, because now you could find the right group of business people on a business platform to promote this need or this desire, you know. But I'm not sure how much it's gonna actually change interaction.
I don't know much about LinkedIn, and I don't belong, but I'm not looking for work. I'm trying to not work. But I did read somewhere, and you can correct me if this is wrong, that there are many businesses that say they don't recruit anymore, they just go to LinkedIn.
Yep, right, absolutely.
We gotta,
Yeah,
like,
it's
we'll
good.
roll
Someone
down.
else got out of
Yeah.
business, headhunters.
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, actually, the headhunters are using it as a
Yeah,
database.
right,
yeah. Oh.
Because they can't get to the data fast enough to find the talent fast enough. And the companies are circumventing the search specialists by going directly. And Patty Dominic was in this world for a while, she could talk about it, but, no, it's replacing how talent pools are allocated.
The other slice of this change is there's also an easy way for people to damage reputations.
Oh, yeah.
And so Karen, how do we manage that, whether you're a corporate or an individual?
There are specialists, and always have been in crisis communication. And my favorite thing is that you go back to, we were talking about this a little bit earlier, that it's really, to my bottom line on this right now is that it used to be that you could, if you were a public figure or a public entity, like a business, and you wanted to send out a message, you could send out that message and you can wait and hear the response, and then you can you can structure, script, and time your next message. You can still do that, except that we're not the problem is that now it's a conversation. So you no longer control the conversation, you are just a participant in it. And my example is Don Sterling, who, has he said anything? Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. Does he have an excuse? Is this blackmail? Is this the result of blackmail and embezzlement and all that? Who knows? It doesn't matter because the conversation's happening without him. So you go back to the time of Tylenol, where Tylenol was tainted by like one bad guy who put poison in a couple bottles of Tylenol, and the CEO of Tylenol went on national television and said, it's my fault because it's my company and we're gonna do something to fix this. And everybody believed in Tylenol. Well, could that happen today?
You probably all listen to NPR, or many of you do. There's someone, not advertising is the wrong word in NPR, but sponsoring, who, I can't remember which show. Thank you, what are they called? Reputation.com? The only reason I know about this is I hear these things on NPR, but there's someone sponsoring them who seems to just say, we'll take care of your online.
Yeah, but they can't, I have a number of friends whose entire business is what's now called reputation management. And these are people who primarily have a background in what's called SEO, search engine optimization. So the things that are going away are things like buying a GPS device. That industry's dead because it's in your car and on your phone, right? Industries that are here to stay right now are search, because it's all about search. If you ask anybody, how do you do this? They'll say, oh, you go to YouTube and find out how to do it. And if they can't figure it out, or if they can't find information online, they assume they are just searching incorrectly. So search is always going to be a big deal. And then owning the results to search, meaning figuring out how to get, especially Google, to put you up at the top, is a big deal. So if you actually go talk to these, I don't know about that particular company, I hear the ads too, but I know people who are very successful in the reputation management world and in the safety, security, and privacy world, which is also reputation management. And one of the biggest things that they do is they increase the search results for the things that you want up, and they bury the search results for the bad stuff. And otherwise, good luck, because you no longer control the conversation. You can just be a part of it.
Yeah, thank you. I think we have to bring the conversation to a close. Is that right, Susan?
Can we thank them, everybody?